You're listening to the Effective Statistician podcast, the weekly podcast with Alexander Schacht and Benjamin Pieske, designed to help you reach your potential, lead great science, and serve patients without becoming overwhelmed by work. Today we are talking about machine learning, AI, predictive analytics, data science, all these buzzwords, and the application of it in the clinical development process. An interview with Karim and I from UCB. Do you like this podcast? Do you learn from it? Do you benefit from it? Then please tell your colleagues about this podcast. Share it on social media and help to spread the word about it, because I really want to help as many statisticians as possible with this podcast. And if we can improve overall the performance of statistics within the healthcare sector, that will benefit everybody. So please share this podcast if you like it, if you benefit from it, if you enjoy it with your colleagues. One thing that I recently learned is that a lot of you are listening to this actually on the browser. So if you only listen to this through the browser, that's of course possible, but maybe you don't know that you can also listen it to your smartphone. There are apps both on Android and on the iPhones to listen to podcasts, and then just use one of these podcasts app, search for the Effective Statistician, and you'll automatically find it in there. Then you can subscribe to this podcast, and each week automatically the podcast episode will be downloaded to your player, and you can listen to it while you're commuting, while you're running, while you're doing homework, whatsoever. All these different things where you just need to do something physically, but your brain has capacity to do something else. Please tell your colleagues about it. It would be awesome to have more listeners. This podcast is produced in association with PSI, a community dedicated to leading and promoting the use of statistics within the healthcare industry for the benefits of patients. Join PSI today to further develop your statistical capabilities with access to the video-on-demand content library, free registration to all PSI webinars, and there are more and more coming of these, and much more. The reduced rates is just £20 for non-high income countries and only £95 for high income countries. Visit the PSI website at psiweb.org to learn more about PSI activities and become a PSI member today. Welcome to another episode of The Effective Statistician, and this is the third interview that I'm doing here in the UK at the UCB offices. And today I'm talking with Karim. Hi, how are you doing?
Hi Alexander, thank you for having me.
Very good. So, Karim, you lead a really interesting group here at UCB, and
Right.
you also have a very interesting career that actually led you to this place. So maybe you can speak a little bit about what your career has been up to now and what your role is here at UCB.
Yeah, of course. So I'm currently head of predictive analytics. My group sits in statistical science. And obviously predictive analytics is one of those umbrella terms that can mean many things. But what we try to do is we try to bring some of the big data methods, AI methods, and machine learning in the clinical development space. And so we are obviously statisticians, so we have an understanding of clinical data and the drug development process. But in addition to this, we also have an eye out for more innovative and multivariable, I would say, methods for data analysis.
What have been your personal exposure to these more new approaches, these big data approaches, deep learning approaches, things like that?
Yeah, well, I started, so I was at King's College for many years, and I think I was among the first probably to apply some of these methods to the analysis of genome-wide association studies. Mm-hmm. So initially there was very much a univariate type of approach where people were trying to find association between single variants and an outcome. And then it clearly became apparent, just because of the way genes work, that we were actually looking for the potential interaction and combination of many variables of very little effect. And so there are methods that can learn to detect patterns of statistical regularity in this very sparse and complex data set, which is still very true for any complex disorder, might give more information. And at the time, of course, the term AI wasn't so used as it is now. It was also some under machine learning. And I have to say that the platforms and some of the tools were also not so widespread. So there the challenge was really in how do we process
the implementation. The theory was there, but the implementation was
correct. And and translating. And so I remember the time we borrowed, we borrowed ideas from our neuroimaging colleagues, and they were a little bit more advanced in that space. Obviously, they work with voxels, right? And we have different challenges, but there the challenge was to translate some of these methods into the genetics space. And so I gained an interest of how these methods could be applied to large-scale genetic and genomic data sets. And it really started from there. And then once you get into these methods, you quickly find applications everywhere. And I think in the course of 10 years, the advancement in the field has been stratospheric, right? So we see the coming of AI, different platforms, a lot of deep learning, and that's thanks also, I think, to progress in computers in general. So now we have very powerful computers. We have code that runs very well on GPUs, and we have specialized machines, and so it's becoming much more accessible.
And I think there's a lot of new players in the field. It's a lot of really big companies that invest a lot of time and effort in improving these things, because it's basically their business model.
Absolutely, and I think in many applications, not in all applications, right? In many applications, they're outclassing and outperforming many of the traditional methods that we've seen so far. Again, I think we have to be a bit cautious, and we have to apply these methods to the right questions, with the right data, and in a judicious manner.
So how was it when you then entered the pharmaceutical industry with this background? What were your main tasks there?
Well, I started at Lilly in the pharmaceutical industry, but there I was in the drug discovery part of the organization. And so in the drug discovery, we do come across large data sets, right? So if we look at all the omics, multi-omics, gene expression, it's very common to be working with thousands of samples, each with potentially millions of features. And so
features, you mean?
By features, variables. Yeah. I'm sorry. I switched between statistics and machine learning terminology.
Yeah.
And so in that space, these methods tend to work reasonably well.
Yeah.
And they work very well for classification, but also for variable reduction.
Yeah.
To try to zoom in and really understand what's driving the signal.
I think in data science it's called feature selection.
Feature selection, that's correct. Yeah, so that's often when we think about machine learning, we just think about potential for classifications, but there are different applications for it, and that's certainly one of them.
Yeah. I once had a person that had a very similar background in my team, so I got exposed a little bit more to these kind of terminology,
Yeah.
So that's quite interesting. So, and now how's it from your role at Lilly in the discovery phase, how's that now changed at UCB?
Well, so at UCB, we sit in clinical development, right? So now we have a compound, right? And then we are supporting all phases of clinical trials and beyond, because really the application of these methods extend across all clinical development, through approval and
even beyond.
And importantly, in fact, a lot of the applications of AI are now in the post-approval stages.
Yeah.
Really, where large data exists.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it stretch, all the way into commercial pricing and beyond.
Yeah. So recently you have been quite instrumental in organizing a really, really nice event together with Cital and with PSI, which was actually happening in the same location as we are recording this here. And for those of you who couldn't attend that, what was this event about?
Oh, yeah, well, it was an event on the impact of AI on clinical development.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a very nice event and attracted a lot of interest across pharma and also some academic groups as well. And it was more about the identification of areas where AI can make a big impact on clinical development. And as we discussed before, I really see the drug life cycle as a hourglass leaning on its side, right? So we start with the discovery phase, where there is large amount of data, and then it kind of funnels in, and then it goes through a very narrow opening. Once we have a compound, right, you filter through a very narrow opening into the clinical development space,
where you don't have so much data.
Right? And that's where you start with the preclinical and early phase clinical trials, and then it funnels out again, and we go towards the later stages clinical trials, where we get more and more data, and then we go into real world evidence, safety, marketing, and then again
you get more and more data.
We get massive amount of data, right?
Also much more heterogeneous data.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a whole other the discussion. But at the flanking side, you have large data, and that's where the impact of AI is greatest, right? Because we particularly for methods such as deep learning, we do need large data sets, and there where you find it. So that's a natural fit.
Yeah.
But now we're seeing that a lot of applications in the early stages of clinical development as well. And here we're seeing technology permeating this space. For example, wearables.
Okay.
Can we use wearables? And they're generating a lot of data.
And because wearables can also be easily used in early phase studies.
Correct.
So, okay.
Absolutely. We have historical data as well from previous trials. Can we combine it? And that's another advantage, I think, of these methods. It's the possibility of integrating
many data sources.
Many data sources. We can ask questions, for example, about what is the best site, site selection, patient selection for inclusion in trials. We can run simulations.
So it's not just about kind of the purely, let's say, biological, medical part.
Correct.
It can be about lots of other problems around it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that's a really, really important area to talk about. In an earlier episode with Andy Grieve, we talked about the entrepreneurial mindset that we need to have in order to contribute value. And there's lots of opportunity where thinking about uncertainty, measuring uncertainty, making sense of data, of available data, or helping to collect the right data to make good decisions can help a lot and can really contribute a lot of value to the overall company.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would take it a step further and say that this is an area, particularly early stages of clinical development, which has some unique characteristics. And it's not only that there is smaller data traditionally available, it's an area which is dense of statisticians. Right?
Okay.
That's where you're going to find lots and lots of statisticians who have experience in this domain. So they have an experience of clinical data. They have an experience of the questions that can be answered, but they don't always embrace the possibility that these methods are offering.
Well, I think it could also be because, these methods come from other areas.
Correct.
Yeah? And so traditionally, you didn't have the questions, you didn't have the data.
Correct.
So I think it's a nice opportunity to learn something new, learn from other areas. Some of these, in other biological areas, but some of these actually kind of a completely different related field, like computer science and things like that, where we can learn a lot from and bring in to these areas. And that's a good. Do you have a case study for that?
Yeah, we do. But just to go back to what you said before, in fact, I think that these methods are largely driven by the data science community, by the computer science community. And we see that also in some of the tools that are generated. For example, now Python almost is one of the default languages. I mean, there are better languages for it, but there's so much developed for Python, for instance, and that's a language that is developed mostly by the computer science community. But don't forget that these methods are really rooted within statistical sciences, and they are within reach of any statisticians. So the learning curve to pick up these methods is not that big.
And just remember a book that I looked into quite some time ago, The Elements of Statistical Learnings, which is one of these classical handbooks where you learn a lot about the different foundational things.
Correct.
And a lot of the applications that we see the foundations are already explained there, and it's called statistical elements. So, yeah. Absolutely,
and that's I think I might be mistaken, but I think you can download it for free.
Could be,
but that's recommended.
Yeah, we'll for sure put the reference into the show notes.
Yeah, I think that's a highly recommended.
It's an awesome book.
Resource. Yeah, but I'm saying these methods are, once you get into them, they are well within the reach and grasp, I think, of all statisticians. And you don't have to be a master at them, and there are things, for example, that computer scientists and data science do differently, or have slightly different skills, different language. So, for example, the skill and agility that they have in actually manipulating. We talked about the importance of the integrity of data.
Yeah.
When we deal with very, very large data sets, you might want to have a certain agility in being able to manipulate it in a way that you can actually then feed it into the algorithm. But what a statistician does bring, as you touched upon, is really the identification of the right design, the correct implementation of these algorithms, which is critical. And that's one of the case studies that I can discuss with you.
Okay, let's go into this case study.
Okay, well, we've, as it happens commonly, we've outsourced or requested the contribution of an external company to apply some machine learning algorithms on some physiological data. And what I see here is a emerging phenomenon where now there is a myriad of small AI companies.
Yeah.
Each promising stonking accuracy scores
Yeah.
If you run their obscure algorithm that runs on their uniquely developed platform, right?
Yes, a proprietary platform.
Yeah, like some sort of proprietary platform, right? With that, auto magic feature that gives you.
Yeah,
it predicts anything, right?
Yeah. With 100% accuracy.
At least 100% accuracy, right? And so, okay, well, so we've actually looked, often these companies will want to please you, right? So they won't necessarily do the most correct thing. They will try to give you anything that will make you happy, right? And the higher the accuracy, the happier you are, right? And so we've looked at some of these algorithms that they've applied, and when you break them down in isolation, everything was correct.
Mm-hmm.
But how they've done the feature selection and how they've done the cross-validation was somewhat problematic.
Okay.
It's something that led to high overfitting.
Okay.
And they came up with a stonking accuracy score, very close to 100%. But when we actually showed them how, when you apply it properly, having a, rigorous statistical approach, there was nothing there.
Yeah.
Or, and I'll give you other...
Just to for those listeners who are not completely familiar with the terms, so basically you have two different steps there. You have first the variable selection.
Correct.
And you do that usually on a training set of the data.
Correct.
And then you use the rest of the data to make sure that is not by chance, because otherwise you, especially with big data sets, you might find, find lots of spurious things, and that's just by chance. And cross-validation is a method to actually look at how good this overall works.
Correct. And, this becomes ever so more important when we're dealing with small data sets. And that's what we're discussing before, right? So when you're not dealing with thousands of people, but you have a sample of 50 or 100,
yeah,
the risk of overfitting, making some of these underlying assumptions become very important. So this is something we come across quite often, and the other
thing is also, it depends sometimes on how you fit in the data. Yeah, so if you first already pre-select based on biologic reasoning variables, you can come up with a very, very different outcome with the overall approach than if you just throw everything into it.
Correct. I mean, there's various approaches, but I think this highlights the fact that running the algorithm is not always the difficulty, particularly today.
Yeah.
So you can go online, take a 2-hour, 3-hour course, and then you know how to run an algorithm. It still doesn't mean that you can do proper statistical analysis.
Yeah. You need to have a good understanding of the original problem, the data, what is really required, and so it's not just have someone in operations
correct
insource some nice of these companies, then they come in, give me the data, show up 2 weeks later and have these stellar results. That's not how it works.
Absolutely. And again, being able to frame the question in a way that it's suitable for this method. First of all, it has to be a meaningful question that you want to start with, right? You don't want to just answer a question just because you can.
Yeah, you want to have questions, relevant questions to answer,
correct,
not find anything in the data that you don't know what to do with it.
Correct. I mean, you can use them for exploratory purposes, right? And here, like other approaches like data mining come to mind. But generally, you want to, particularly for our field, you want to make sure that you have a question which is very clear and appropriate.
So it helps you actually to move forward your pipeline.
Absolutely, and here statisticians I think are critical because they have this understanding, and then the other part is really having an understanding of the structure and substructure of the data. And so we think, there's the old saying that, if you're a hammer, all problems look like nails. And here, there are some people that will apply one or two chosen methods to everything, right? But again, it's not a shortcut. You still need to try to understand the structure, substructure of data, and try to apply a method that best matches what you're trying, what you're working with, and what you're trying to answer.
Yeah, and also I think you need to have a really good understanding of the data, so and how these different things work together.
Absolutely.
So I've seen people that go then and come up with results and say, oh yeah, well, if this variable is high, that variable is also very high. And people say, we know, because that variable is actually mostly derived from that variable.
Correct, absolutely. But you need to spend the time and explore your data set as you would with any other method. So it's not a shortcut. And I had occasions where people have come to me saying, I've just tried everything, nothing works. Can you do some machine learning on it? And that's, that's not the approach, right? It's not this panacea or last resort. It's a method that has its right application.
Yeah, but I think that is also a little bit due to the hype about it. That people have exaggerated expectations sometimes, and as you said, sometimes that is fueled by actually companies that want to make a profit with it. And so I think it's having this right balance between the hype, the really, really nice things that you can do with it. And so as you said, picking the hammer when it's appropriate and picking a screwdriver otherwise, or something else. Yeah,
and I see it, I think my team sees it very much as a tool, as an instrument. If you can address the question using perhaps a more simple method or any other statistical method, then that's absolutely fine. I think we shouldn't be tribal in the application of any specific method. We should really start with from the questions and from the data.
Yeah.
And I'm convinced that as we are gathering more and more data from more and more technology, we will be able to answer increasingly complex questions. And I do think that the answer to complex questions generally comes from a collaborative, multidisciplinary approach, where statisticians are a critical element of. And so being able to gain an appreciation of these methods, as I said, you don't have to become a master at them, but just understanding what these methods can do and being aware of some of the limitations, underlying assumptions, the appropriateness, will enable most statisticians to interact with our data science, computer science partners, and together we can work to bring forward projects that are meaningful to any pharma company.
So one of the words that is big buzzword in this overall thing that we're talking about is this word of statistical innovation.
Yeah.
So if you think about statistical innovation, what does that mean for you?
Okay, well, again, it's, as you said, it's one of those terms that can mean a lot of
because I think there's no right or wrong. It's but for you personally, what does it mean?
Well, I think it means two things to me, or how we are applying statistical innovation within my group. And one of them is the applications of novel methods of analysis, for example, deep learning, and other types of methods, or a combination of methods. For example, can we use some of the Bayesian approaches to reduce some of the search space, and then, as you touched on before, there might be some variables that have biological reasons for being there. How do we incorporate different methods to create approaches that can extract more insight from the available data. And then the second approach is really methods development.
Okay.
So I think certainly our group is involved in the development of novel methods of analysis, and it may be just combining a range of methods to create an algorithm that specifically answers questions, or perhaps even looking at developing an algorithm that improves on what is currently there. But I think being at the forefront of methods development is an integral part of innovation.
Why do you think it's so important as kind of a data science, statistics organization within a company to work on these method development as well?
Okay, because I think today data is no longer a problem. So it used to be in the past. Accessing large amount of data was complicated, was expensive, but today there are so many different type of repositories. Particularly pharma have lots of historical data available. So that's no longer a limiting factor.
The barriers are not completely away, but have decreased a lot.
Sure, but I wouldn't rank that as the number one limiting factor, where perhaps it could have been more in the past. Today, the limiting factor is how can we harness and use all this data that we have available, and this I think gives us a lot of opportunities to look at methods that can integrate lots of data, that can leverage and combine the power of everything that we have in order to extract further insights. So I think we're facing a very nice opportunity as well as challenge, and here perhaps the traditional methods, particularly, and here I'm kind of thinking more of the kind of univariate type of methods. They will still be very useful, but we're never going to replace them. But perhaps we can look at other methods that can allow us to use this data in novel ways and extract much more meaning than what we have.
I think there's another trend that we see, and that is more and more data becomes available to everybody. So there's much more open source and democratization of data, and the best use of the data will basically give you a competitive advantage. And those companies that don't invest in developing new methods will always lag behind in terms of the knowledge, how they can apply to it, and so they will always have a competitive disadvantage over those companies that attract talents that actually also want to work on these most cutting-edge approaches, and that are able to implement these newest and novel approaches to make more sense of the data, make better sense of the data, and therefore having better decisions in the overall drug development process.
Absolutely, and this brings to mind one of the talks that took place at our joint PSI symposium with Chris Havron, who discussed how Roche is actually building communities, statistical communities, where they're making these data sets available to very different groups.
Different groups within Roche.
Different groups. But you can take this model and extract it. Make it global, if you will. Even if you wish, we have our data sets, and then you just allow teams of people, to come up with different ways of analyzing and answering the questions. And I think just in the approach, you can actually see how they're approaching the problem, how they're applying methods or developing methods. You get a lot of ideas, and this gives you answer, but it also gives you potential new questions. And I thought that was a great approach, and I think it's very important to embrace and be active in the community. Encourage, be part of it, but also drive it and encourage this approach, because as we said before, it's not these are not questions that often can be answered by an individual or a team. I think it really needs a
community,
a really collaborative community approach. And we've seen that, and hats off to our computer science colleagues who really, I think, embraced that and done that. If you want to enter a machine learning competition, you have your choice. And people are not only making data available; they're making code available. You're building a community, in a way we're actually addressing, methodological challenges.
And these communities are actually really areas where lots of innovation can happen and lots of change can happen. And there's a lot of different examples in history about that. One of the most prominent ones is actually, for example, the so-called Medici effect. The Medici was a very, very rich family in the middle of Italy, in Florence, and they attracted lots of different highly skilled people, philosophers, artists, and they all came together, and basically that originated the Renaissance. So if you bring lots of nicely skilled people together, you create an environment where they work together.
Correct.
Not so much against each other. There can be some healthy competition, I think. That's good. That really drives innovation, and I think here, as we have more and more data becoming available, data becomes an asset overall, and analyzing the data and getting the best insights out of the data becomes a competitive advantage. So I think that's why innovation is so important. That's why also statisticians need to embrace all these different technologies, understand them, and then apply them correctly. So that, I think, is a
absolutely, and I think there is a need and demand for statisticians, to be part of this community and these movements that are happening. And it's not only in the analysis, but for example in the development of IT platforms and methods. I mean,
there's a lot of things. Also,
things are going in parallel, right? It's not just about analysis. It's okay. You might have, that's why neural nets took so long, perhaps, to be so widespread. Which is, I think, it's really, we knew about these methods for 20 years. It's just now that now we have the hardware and computer power and platforms that enable to run it, and that's also growing. It's another discipline, but it's a sister discipline that is growing exponentially, right? So now you don't even need to have hardware in-house, you can just do it on the cloud. Pay for use.
And the other thing is, in parallel with these kind of things, you have all these digital solutions, so to say, that come, where you not just have the biological pill, so to say, but you enhance it with, variables, with other digital things that make sure that you're using it in the right way, and that you get more out of it, or that you do treat yourself also with non-pharmacological things and improve your health. So I think there's a lot of things happening there where AI or machine learning plays a bigger role.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And you've touched upon some of them. I think also there are other areas where I think AI will have a big impact, which is all the digital text arena. I think that's a big area.
Natural language
processing. So that's we're able to now capture information that perhaps wasn't so available in the past, and then use that in statistical models, for example. Imaging, again, is probably one of the highest areas, just because these methods work so well on images, but any sort of, if you think about neuroimaging, radiography, all the stuff, I think it works really well, and so there are great applications. But for statisticians, maybe there is an opportunity to integrate some of this data, for example, with clinical data. And as you said, imagine the possibility of using models that include a variety of sources, including clinical data with, for example, physiological data, behavioral, other type of behavioral data, lifestyle data,
Yeah.
and then again, people don't live in vacuums, right? They live in an environment, and so being able to capture also some of the environmental data and lifestyle data, as you touched upon, I think is going to be critical.
Yeah, I think I'm absolutely sure that for certain diseases, weather conditions play a role or things like that. So there's lots of possibilities, and I think it's really a call to action for statisticians to look for opportunities there, look out for additional training like the PSI events that we have recently had,
Sure.
and I'm pretty sure there will be lots of further webinars coming up. There's surely something at the next PSI conference that's coming up, and so I can only encourage people to have a look into that, and also reach out to colleagues within the companies that work on that. And these might not sit directly in the statistics department, they might sit in other departments. And I think working there together and not playing us against them is much more the better approach to move overall forward.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned PSI, and I believe they have a special interest group.
Yeah, there's a special interest group
in
on
data science, so
yeah.
That's something I would recommend people to get involved with. But then I think it's really down to statisticians to be somewhat proactive, and there's plenty of online resources,
Yeah.
and it doesn't take much because these are methods that are familiar. I mean, I like to, for example, now to think of logistic regression as a machine learning method, right? It's true. Like, just use it in a training testing, the design, and you have the basis of machine learning.
It's if you look into LinkedIn and you look for data science, and then you get all this material about data science, and they often start with a t-test. Yeah. So I think it's really hard to say this is data science and this is statistics. I'm not sure there's a clear-cut border, and to be honest, I'm not sure whether we need a clear-cut border. Actually.
No, and I think one of the talks at our symposium discussed this, right? I mean, aren't statisticians scientists who work with data?
Yeah.
Right. So really, you could probably, you apply, the term that you cannot apply the term data scientist to statisticians as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thanks so much.
Well, thank you very much,
Karim, for this nice discussion. And I think we learned a lot about data science today. We learned a lot about how the industry likely will change and what are all the different possibilities. And I think overall there's a pretty bright future for those statisticians that take action.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Alexander.
Thanks.
This show was created in association with PSI. Thanks to Rain, who helps with the show in the background, and thank you for listening. Please visit theeffectivestatistician.com, where you can find the show notes, and you can learn more about our podcast, boost your career as a statistician in the health sector. And please, 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 don't forget to tell your colleagues about this podcast. We want to spread the word and get as much impact on statisticians in the healthcare sector as we can. So, like always, reach your potential, lead great science, and serve patients. Just be an effective statistician.